Hi, my name is Ann McElhenney.
And I'm Phelim McAleer.
And welcome to the Ann Phelim Scoop. It is June 2020. We're still in some form of a lockdown, but we kind of feel freedom is nearby. I don't know, I kind of feel like I could smell it, but that could be the smell of pee from the cats.
Or it could be your white privilege.
It could be my white privilege, yeah. There seems to be a lot of that smell around, all right.
That's right.
We have a really great guest joining us later, Miranda Devine, who is a columnist for the New York Post.
And for the Daily Telegraph in Australia. And she has a really international and national perspective. She's been based in New York for almost a year now. So it's going to...
You'll enjoy that. But also it's kind of a fun story because how we very first came across her. Anyway, we'll save that for now. So it's the 12th week of the lockdown.
Yes.
But things definitely, for sure, are changing. But just because of, obviously because of science, nail salons are still closed.
My nails are just terrible. Hold on, excuse me while I adjust my microphone.
Your bike paths are open, and you can actually now be delightfully inactive on the beach, apparently.
Oh, yeah?
I think so. By the way, I'm not 100% sure about that, but we've seen a lot of inactivity on the beach, which is nice. You can get your hair done if you don't mind wearing a mask for 2 hours, and I did get my hair done, but I found it quite stressful. Borders are opening up. Oh, by the way, yeah, and in the midst of all that, just here in California, the piers aren't open. So the bike path is open, the beach is open, the pier is not open. Oh, and the car parks are not open.
But borders are opening in Europe.
But borders are opening in Europe. We've got a friend telling us from Monaco that the Italian border will be open this week. So for anyone wanting to get to Italy, things will be open there. And I think lots of shops, a lot of retail, I think pretty much everything is open in Italy. But we had another friend talking to us at the weekend from Singapore, and they've really had, when this is all told and the history is all recounted, I think they've had a really tough time. I mean, I think kind of like England. Actually, I think it's been a bit like England there. So they've been indoors pretty much. Him and his wife and 2 children have been indoors, not allowed to visit other friends in the apartment complex, right? Yeah. And they can't leave Singapore because their business is there, and if they were left, they couldn't get back. Yeah. But they're hoping that something new is going to change. Yeah,
well, to paraphrase Churchill, all over Europe borders are coming down, but there's iron curtains are going up even within countries. If you go to the UK, United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland now,
oh yes,
you have to fill in a form to say where you're going to be for the next 14 days, and you're not allowed to
where
leave.
You've been, and by the way, where you've been for the previous month or whatever.
Yes, and the same if you go to the Republic of Ireland, you have to fill in a form to say where you're going to be for the next 14 days. However, if you go to Belfast and take the train down to the Republic of Ireland, you need nothing.
So what you can do is, in the morning, you could lick a doorknob in Wuhan, fly to London, and then fly to Belfast, and then get on the train and whoopie-doo-dah day, because science, Phelim. Because science.
Science is important.
Oh yeah, I think we're all getting a really good lesson in what science really means right now. But
I mean, what else have we got? We're going to talk. We're going to look at why anyone who believes Black Lives Matter, anyone who tells you that they believe Black Lives Matter is wrong, but why I think they're wrong. And got our hair done. We'll talk about that. Borders are up, but chaos ensues. And we look at who you're supposed to hate this week because of their opinions. I'm not going to say who it is, but Will Harry Potter ever be the same again? And the answer is yes. Before we go on to that, the world is getting funnier by the day. Sean Ono Lennon, who is an old fracking enemy,
nemesis of yours. Yes.
I have given himself and his wife and his mother a hard time, but he's becoming strangely independent
thinking.
He was the guy who got really upset about the fact that he wasn't allowed to call the Wuhan flu the Wuhan flu. Do you remember that?
So I think he just doesn't like the kind of the thought police, right? Or the the kind of 1984 aspect of things. And this one,
but he's a progressive.
Yeah, but this particular this latest tweet from him is quite extraordinary. So we just saw this tweet earlier. And he basically has tweeted out to the New York Times, because the New York Times, as you know, has announced that they announced that the editorial page editor, James Bennett,
Is resigning.
Is resigning.
And if you're listening to this on the podcast now on YouTube, resigning is air quotes
resigning because
for the temerity of running a op-ed from a United States senator
duly elected,
who defended sending in the military to deal with violent protesters.
Only if, by the way, if the police
were overwhelmed.
You know, so that's what he said.
But
for that, first of all the snowflakes in the news department at the New York Times all went into a complete flutter over that, and then the New York Times had to bow down, change the headline. I think they changed the headlines a couple of times.
Oh, and the editorial page editor.
And the editorial page editor is gone. But anyway, Sean Ono Lennon, so that's John Lennon's son, has written to the New York Times in a tweet saying, "This is the end for you guys. Firing someone for allowing different opinions in your paper means you are no longer a real newspaper. It's been fun. You had a good run. The best, in fact. Rest in peace," says Sean Ono Lennon. Wow. So we're very impressed with that particular... he's had some kind of an evolution. Who knows what's happened? He may have... Sure, maybe he got the Wuhan flu and it affected his brain.
Maybe the fracking from Pennsylvania affected his brain.
In a positive way.
Yeah. So I want to talk about George Floyd, the death of George Floyd, and the protests and the curfews and all that. So first of all, I want to say systemic racism in America is a myth.
Absolutely.
This is not a systemically racist country.
I can prove it.
How?
So a black president became the president of the United States. Twice.
He was re-elected.
Twice. And because the black population in the United States is a minority, I think 13% of the population, he got the popular vote, I think, twice. Yes. So it means all kinds of white people voted for a black president twice.
And they had a black attorney general.
But by the way, prior to that, George Bush had Secretary of State who was black, right?
But no, I think I suppose a president appointing someone is different from the public, the American public
voting for someone.
I mean, and also if America is systemically racist, I mean, compared to where? I mean, compared to everywhere in the planet, this is the best country in the world for minorities. Maybe the UK is better, maybe, and that's why Africans are risking their lives to get into the USA and into the UK. They're not risking their lives to get to Nigeria or to get to other African countries or to Latin America or to Asia or to China or to Russia.
They all want to come here to the systemic
and they all go through France and Germany, and thousands of them. They have camps where they plot how to get into the UK, and then they also come here and abuse the immigration system, often by claiming refugee status. But it's all about getting to the USA. So they know that America is not racist. They know this is the best place in the world for an African American, for a black person, for a minority. And regarding George Floyd, let's see if it was a murder. Murder in a legal sense. Was there malice? Was there racism? It's hard. Of course, it's impossible to look. It's hard to look into the motives of a man. It's even harder to know the soul of a man. So we don't know the details of the George Floyd death yet. We
do know that he had health complications, and that made it difficult to get that might make it difficult to get a murder conviction. A conviction that is clear that the police officer caused, with malice, meant to cause his death. Yeah, but we don't know. We don't know.
That's what a murder means. A murder means an actual. You have to find that the police officer caused and with malice meant to cause the death, and that is That's a high bar.
It's a high bar.
So and people talk about murder. I'm talking about it in a legal sense. Now, maybe relatives or co-workers of this officer will come forward and state he had malice, and maybe we'll find social media postings that he had racist intentions. And so let's hold back and see what comes out in the trial on this aspect of this death. But maybe the police officer involved, Derek Chauvin, and maybe he had an extensive. I think he did. He had a record of aggression and violence
and complaints against him.
But not maybe violence is the wrong word, but definitely were complaints about him. But police officers do get a lot of complaints, and maybe his were justified. Maybe he should not be a police officer. It's possible, maybe likely. Then why was he not fired before now? And the obvious answer is that his job was protected by the powerful police union. Unfortunately, the role of unions is now to protect the job of the worst employees in every organisation. And so as such, it's impossible to fire a rogue cop in many, if not most, police forces.
And can I just say, by the way, and I can't remember the actual number, but I think it was something like 18, that you were 18 times more likely, 18, that the number of people who get sacked from the private sector is 18 times what the number of people who get sacked from the public sector.
Yeah.
So that if you work for the government, you're in a much more protected, I think everyone kind of instinctively knows that. Yes. You're in a much more protected class than people. So, this is a very protected class, the police. And when they're talking about defunding police and all of this kind of thing, perhaps that's the very first place they should start. And I'm not sure if all the progressives who are asking to defund the police are actually, if they realise that that's actually the first place they need to start.
These police unions
are very powerful.
And they protect the worst workers. And this is extremely dangerous.
In fact, I think the unions have said in this case that they want all these officers to be reinstated, by the way.
Yeah. So this is extremely dangerous. It allows unsuitable people to remain police officers. It discourages good police officers from being better, because they see bad police officers being protected and from facing the consequences of their actions. So if you're serious about stopping police misbehaviour, then you must end police unions and allow civilians to decide the code of conduct and the punishment of officers, or at very least oversee the disciplining of officers. These civilians should face elections. They shouldn't be appointed by some other politician. They should face elections and be responsible for what they do, so the public can have more of a say in the kind of police force they want. Will the progressive left, which demands police reform, be brave enough to demand the most significant reform of all? Will they take on the unions? But also, having said all that, it's not clear how much reform is needed. Is there really systemic racism in America or in its police force? On the Ann Phelim Scoop, and you can go back and listen to it, we've interviewed Heather McDonald from the Manhattan Institute. She's an expert on urban policing, actually, and here's what she had to say in a recent Wall Street Journal op-ed.
In 2019, police officers fatally shot 1,004 people, most of whom were armed or otherwise dangerous. African Americans were about a quarter of those killed by cops last year, 235, a ratio that has remained stable since 2015. That share of black victims is less than what the black crime rate would predict, since police shootings are a function of how often officers encounter armed and violent suspects. In 2018, the latest year for which such data has been published, African Americans made up 53% of known homicide offenders in the US and commit about 60% of robberies, though they are 13% of the population. The police fatally shot, and this is important, all of this is important, and this is Heather McDonald writing for the Wall Street Journal. The police fatally shot 9 unarmed blacks and 19 unarmed whites in 2019, according to a Washington Post database, down from 38 and 32 for 2015. The Post defines unarmed broadly to include such cases as a suspect in Newark, New Jersey, who had a loaded handgun in his car. And that's called unarmed, by the way. He had a loaded handgun in his arm during a police chase. In 2018, there were 7,407 black homicide victims. Assuming a comparable number of victims last year, those 9 unarmed black victims of police shootings represent 0.1% of all African Americans killed in 2019. So of all the black people killed in 2019, 0.1% were killed by the police officers. By contrast, a police officer is 18.5 times more likely to be killed by a black male than an unarmed black male is to be killed by a police officer. That's a pretty strong statement. So 18.5 times more likely to be killed. The police officer is more likely to be killed than the other way around.
Of course, this doesn't mean that the killing of George Floyd was justified.
No.
It's a tragedy. It is an actual tragedy. It's awful.
And that video is awful. It is just awful. And, it's very hard to see any possible justification for that kind of excessive force. But we're going to hear,
Let's see.
But I'm just going to make the point, Phil, yeah? That's why there is courts of law, which is great actually.
Yeah.
Otherwise, at this point, back in the day, right, if you didn't have a court of law, that man would be taken out and he would be killed, right?
Who?
Chauvin, the police officer.
Well,
the police officer would have been killed by the mob. There is a mob out there who want him dead.
Yes.
And they would have done that.
Yes.
But we have a justice system, so there'll be a court case, a lengthy court case.
However,
everyone involved has been arrested,
however,
right?
I worry about the court case. I don't know what jury would be brave enough to acquit this officer, because you know that if the officer is acquitted, there will be rioting and people will die, and what jury wants to face that? So it's going to be a very difficult case. It's going to be hard for this man to get a fair trial, and everyone deserves a fair trial. But those statistics we talked about earlier, where a black male, an officer is 18 times more likely to be killed by a black male than an unarmed black male is to be killed by a police officer, doesn't mean it was justified.
No.
And it doesn't represent a pattern of policing.
No, that's the big point.
Yes.
It's not representative.
Yeah,
so this case, this terrible case, isn't a sign of something that's been happening everywhere. It's exactly the opposite.
It's actually the opposite. I mean, just as we're told, that the actions of 19 Muslims on 9/11 do not represent the beliefs of all Muslims, then the actions of Derek Chauvin don't represent the actions of all police officers. In fact, the statistics show that if this was an illegal killing or murder, then they represent an aberration. It's actually going against a trend of decreasing police killings every year, and an enormous decrease in police killings from 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago. And
I have to say, and we know some police officers very well, and I think it's a really hard time for police officers. I just read something on Facebook the other day where a woman was out, and she was an African-American woman, she was out jogging or whatever, and the police car went past her and she did a very definite salute and waved at them and whatever. And then later on she was coming back and the same police car had been going a different direction or something. And this police car stopped, and woman police officer, a black woman, another black woman, came out and just embraced the woman who was jogging and to thank her for, giving the salute and giving her a wave and a kind of a thumbs up. Because it's a really hard time to be a police officer, a really, really hard time. And we know that from our friends who are police officers. It's a really, really hard time. And you think of, I was kind of comparing it in a way to the paedophile priest thing, in a sense that, the actions of some priests gave every priest in everywhere a really bad name. And actually, I'll tell you where it falls down is the problem with the paedophile priests was that the hierarchy of the priests protected them. In this case, it's the unions protecting them.
Yeah.
But another thing that caught my eye that I thought was worth mentioning was that, last weekend, so that was the last weekend in May, or the weekend before that, I should say. So 2 weekends ago, there was a rather grim statistic: 18 murders in 24 hours inside the most violent day in 60 years in Chicago. So all these, protests have started. 18 murders in 24 hours in Chicago.
Sunday, May the 31st, making it, and this is from Chicago Sun-Times, making it the single most violent day in Chicago in 6 decades, according to the University of Chicago Crime Lab.
And it's even worse, from 7 p.m. Friday, May the 29th, until Sunday, May the 31st, 25 people were killed in the city. 25 people. And the point that's made, actually, interestingly enough, in this Chicago Sun-Times story is that most homicide victims in Chicago are young black men, and the suspects are also young black men. So it's black on black crime. But we're not hearing about that. And I went through the story, and I'm not going to go into it in detail. I just thought it was a kind of a grim statistic that in the middle of all of this isn't getting any attention at all. In amongst the dead are two, I'm literally tearing up just thinking about this. 2 of the victims are 2 girls, 18 years old, who had just finished high school. 2 young African-American girls. And no one knows their names, and no one's talking about them. And Black Lives Matter, but it seems some Black Lives Matter a lot more than others.
But also Black Lives, a number, and I'm counting them up, but we haven't come to the complete total yet, but a number of black people have died as a result of the riots.
Yes, yes.
Being shot and killed by looters.
Captain Dorn, for example,
Yeah.
a 77-year-old retired police officer who had gone out to help his friend, to protect his friend's shop, his pawn shop, and who was gunned down. And is not now. Luckily, some people have rallied around and have tried to show support, and I think there was a little bit of a march in honor of him. But really, he's not the only victim in these protests and riots and looting that just get forgotten. That just get forgotten, and it's really horrible. And Chicago, basically every weekend in Chicago, people get murdered. Those people are African Americans. They are very often, in the most cases, killed by other African Americans. And that's not a story that seems to ever get national attention.
Yeah.
It just doesn't. So that's kind of, we'll be watching this story and monitoring it, because it's not over, I don't think.
And we're going to be covering the trial, I think, as well. This is an important trial.
Very important trial.
And,
that's something we'd really love to do. So don't forget, please. You know that we can do this better than anyone. We covered the Harvey Weinstein trial up in New York, as you know, and
we covered the Chevron trial,
and we covered the Planned Parenthood body parts trial up in San Francisco. So this is something we like to do. So please donate to the unreportedstorysociety.com, unreportedstorysociety.com. We love monthly giving, but we also like big gifts, and we are very grateful for those people who have given us gifts.
You can become a sustaining member.
Keeping the lights on here.
Yeah, literally the lights. And
we
have big lights.
And the lights were off this morning, so we're very lucky to be here.
We woke up this morning at 5 a.m. and the electricity was off here in Venice because of the high winds. And I have to say, there was a bit of me going, oh, terrible, we're not going to be able to do the
anyway,
we can lie on.
The electricity quite quickly came back on. In happier news, we're kind of happier, but not really happier. I thought it was going to be happier. I got my hair done on the weekend. The hair salons opened on Friday, and I was able to go on Saturday. But it was really a very stressful and a really nasty experience, actually. I had to have my temperature taken at the door. I had this whole elaborate thing of don't come in until you're ushered in. They only had 2 people in there at the time, so I was looking around thinking, how are they going to make a living here? I had to wear a mask. And they immediately asked me, did I want to hand sanitize? And I had just come out of the shower, so I said, no, I'm grand. But I would really like a glass of water. And they said, oh, no, we can't do that anymore. There's none of that, no more of that. And, I do wear a mask going into supermarkets, but then, I found I started to really panic because it was like an hour later, I'm still wearing the mask. So luckily, she has an outdoor sort of patio. And I said, do you mind if I go out there? But anyway... I'm still wearing a hat though, because I couldn't bear to sit there long enough to get a blow dry. So the hat is very useful. I would have to say, women out there, get a hat. It gives you it takes away a lot of stress on the hair maintenance. Unless
if you've a hat, don't get a cat.
Oh, if you've got a hat, don't get a hat. Oh God, because you might remember I had a different version of this hat earlier, and I really liked it. I got it in Costco, $30, very nice hat. I still have it. But now it has a very, very strong smell. So we don't know which culprit, but one of the cats peed on my hat. And I then thought, because my mother used to say that the sun was a great disinfectant. She was a great believer in that.
She was wrong. She never had cats. And she never had indoor cats. And
I put the cat out in the sun, and actually, you know what it did? It concentrated the smell. So it's really bad. Yeah. So if anyone has any suggestions about how to wash something like this, and by the way, when you look inside the collar, it says don't wash, don't whatever, but otherwise the hat has to go, so it's very upsetting. Anyway, what's happening, Phelim? What else is happening today?
I mean, the borders and everything's opening up, and we talk about this in the Daily Virus. By the way, this is the YouTube, this is the long version.
This is the scoop, the weekly scoop.
It's available on podcast too, but we do this shorter version of a daily program, the Daily Virus, which you can listen to there on the podcast app. Everywhere's opening up, but it's got nothing to do with science.
Oh, it's got nothing to do with science.
I mean, you look at it, so
it's so arbitrary.
The governments, and whether they're right wing in the UK, left wing in Ireland, in California to New York, they say we're doing this, and then there's a backlash, and they're going, actually, we're going to speed it up. And it's got nothing to do with data, nothing to do with science.
Leo Varadkar, the Prime Minister in Ireland, he was kind of doing these phased-in thing, and then it was like, yeah, we're going to accelerate that. Because he got a backlash because of the fact that Ireland is incredibly dependent on tourism. I mean, as is Italy, by the way, and so many other places. And suddenly it's like, well, we're going to accelerate. We're just going to accelerate the opening up of things. So anyway, but we'll monitor that, and we should ask you to please do listen to the daily podcast. Yeah, but what else has happened, Phelim?
Well, J.K. Rowling.
J.K. Rowling,
the author of the Harry Potter books.
God bless her.
God bless her. Literary greats.
What did she do?
I don't know. I don't care. Actually, I probably do know. But so apparently,
I know.
Apparently, we're supposed to hate her now, and boycott everything, and she should be excluded from public life and thrown in a lake. And if she sinks, she's guilty. And if she swims, she's guilty. And if she floats, she's guilty. And I don't know, really. I haven't looked into all the details of what she's supposed to have done. I don't even want to talk about it because I kind of feel like talking about it to some extent validates the order that has gone out that we should hate her. Apparently, she has offended the wokerati and the Twitterati and the fascist-ati, and now, after a lifetime of her supporting every liberal cause that ever came about. Yes, the order has gone out that you're supposed to hate her, and because she's strayed from the orthodoxy in one political opinion, and she's done this, of course, because you can't have differing political opinions now. If you have differing political opinions now, it's because you are a bad person. It's because you are evil. It's because you've done it out of complete nastiness and hatred. I never liked J.K. Rowling's political opinions on almost every matter.
Now you found yourself strangely liking her.
No, I don't.
Oh, you don't even like her now?
No, but I do not. So now she has one opinion that I might agree, but I haven't even looked at her opinion. It's about,
I kind of know what it is.
It's about transgender, but no. By
the way,
I
really want to say it.
But hold on,
people are going to want to know what it is.
I know, but the thing is, was it a tweet?
It was a tweet. I think it was a tweet.
So by the way, I'm not going to even say I understand every nuance of her opinion from one tweet. So maybe my interpretation of this tweet might be different from what she actually meant. So I never liked her political opinions before this. I didn't think, like most extremely wealthy people nowadays, extremely wealthy people recommend political ways of organizing society that stop other people from becoming them. They negate hard work, they negate talent, they negate stick-at-itness, they negate deferred gratification. They think that other people need handouts that they never got. So it's a funny way of looking at the world.
Dennis Prager has a great quote about that.
I disagree.
Preach what you practice. That they should preach what they practice. Yes. Because in their own lives, they're hardworking. They're actually very conservative. So preach what you practice. It's a hat tip to.
But I never thought of not reading Harry Potter books. By the way, I've never read a Harry Potter book.
I've never read a Harry Potter book.
Which most people out there will be shocked. I've never thought of not reading a Harry Potter book or not watching a Harry Potter movie or not going to the theme park because of her political opinions. And I'm not going to now start reading it because one interpretation of one of her opinions might agree with one of mine. It's a very sad world we live in, where someone's dissension from the orthodoxy is automatically pegged as being from malice and badness and evilness. When she probably has studied this more than 99.9% of people who are attacking her and has come to an independent conclusion.
Well, when you look up the tweet, because obviously Phelim's not happy to share this information with you, look it up, check it out.
What is it?
No, it's just
okay, let me get it here.
You get it up there, but basically she has offended transgenders everywhere.
No, she hasn't.
Yes, she has.
No, actually, I bet you she hasn't. I bet you she's offended progressives who claim to speak for transgenders.
Okay, Phelim, open up the tweet there, please.
So here's the headline that she's talking about. I was correct, actually. Opinion: creating a more equal post-COVID-19 world for people who menstruate, and it's called Women. As she says, it's women, right? And I mean, so I agree with her probably in that, but who knows? So, I'd like to, I could talk to her more and find out what she's really thinking. But I love these stories too. It's because all these news stories now, it's Twitter users launch, and it's like, when I was a journalist, like the worst job in the world was the vox pop, right? going out on the street, and it was like we always viewed it. You always, when the news editor was sitting there and suddenly had this faraway look in their eye, everyone hid because you knew they were thinking, I haven't anything original to say. I can't. There's no news out there. Let's do a vox pop on that. Let's do a vox pop, and everyone hid immediately because you have to go out and you have to find. And back then it wasn't people. At least people didn't hate journalists so much then. And in Northern Ireland was a bit difficult because you know, if you asked the wrong person the wrong question, you could get a punch or worse. Twitter stories about outrage on Twitter are just vox pops. In fact, they're lazy vox pops because
you didn't have to get out. You didn't have to get out of your bed basically to find them.
This is not real news.
Okay. But it's worth checking it out. But it's kind of, you know, it's another one of those crazy transgender things that goes into the same category, by the way, of, you know, of transgenders being treated as women in sport, which is a complete offence and an insult.
But by the way, it's a perfectly. I mean, I can't see how anyone could think that having that opinion, it comes from malice or some evil intent, right? There's a real.
You haven't met enough transgenders, Phelim, I think.
No, actually, I probably haven't met enough transgender activists, which I think is different from transgenders. But it's like it's a genuine question, especially from women's rights point of view. You're going to destroy women's sports, right? If you allow this. Anyway, so I mean,
we will be definitely talking more.
I don't know. I feel like I should read Harry Potter, but now I don't know what to do because I just hate being told what I should and shouldn't read, depending on someone's political opinion.
Okay, we're way more time than we expected for this part of the program. So we're going to go. We spoke earlier to Miranda Devine of the New York Post, the columnist from the New York Post, and we're going to go over to that right now. So let's have a listen. Well, hello.
Hello, and welcome now to Miranda Devine. So just to give you some introduction on how we first came across Miranda.
I love this. Can I just say, I just love this story so much. It's like one of those kind of once in a lifetime stories, because we flew, you don't probably even know this, Miranda, we flew in to Sydney, Australia on, I think, I looked it up today. It was November, what have I got? I had the date there earlier. Anyway, November 2006. And we just land and we get the Sydney Morning Herald and we open it up.
It's in the lounge, actually, yeah.
And basically there's an article written about our documentary Mind Your Own Business, written by Miranda Devine. And we like this Miranda. Well, I don't know who this Miranda Devine is, but we really like this Miranda Devine.
Yes, she obviously has great taste.
Excellent taste.
And it was a great welcome to Sydney. It was a great welcome to Australia. And it really helped the documentary. People were very impressed that Miranda Devine was writing about our documentary, so it really gave it a kick off for that week. People were very impressed that Miranda was very impressed by the documentary. So just to give people a little background about Miranda, she's hated by the far left in at least 3 continents. Although the number may be more continents you could add there, you could fill me in on that one. You'll update us. She's an Australian columnist and writer. Her columns have appeared in almost every major Australian newspaper, too many to list. You've also written for UK newspapers, and in a very interesting experiment, you have been posted to New York to write a column for the New York Post to cover the 2020 election and the other uninteresting
things that might happen in 2020.
In a quiet, was supposed to be a relatively quiet news year in
it's like, here's a nice idea. They probably said to her, in the newsroom in Australia, why don't you go to America in 2020? There's like in November, I mean, whatever will happen during 2020, but there's going to be this election. It'll probably dominate your work. You're going to be doing a lot of.
You'll be on the road a lot.
How has 2020 been for you so far then, Miranda?
Well, I mean, the Chinese say, may you live in interesting times, and we sure do. It's been the most incredible, 6 months of my life, and it's exciting enough to be covering Donald Trump, who's, the craziest president that in my lifetime. And let alone now, of course, the pandemic and then the economic collapse and now the riots. And Donald Trump's still standing, though.
So far.
Yeah. So when did you first come to New York then for this particular stint?
So that was in July last year. And I started writing basically about New York stories. I'm a former police reporter, and the big story that was happening when I arrived in that hot summer was that the police were being abused by people. They were having water thrown on them, and people were deliberately flouting the law and jumping turnstiles in the subway and, swearing at cops, and they'd show up to jobs or to protect firefighters in the housing projects in the Bronx, and they'd have rocks and things thrown at them. And so it was a very hostile atmosphere. And I had lived in New York back in the late 80s, early 90s, when it was, my parents were living there and I was a student, and it was very dangerous then. And that was sort of before the Rudy Giuliani police cleanup. And I just remember when Times Square was a no-go zone, and women getting raped in Central Park, and, you couldn't get off the subway at 125th Street or you'd die. And so suddenly, over the intervening years, New York had become very safe, and I travel there, on holidays quite often. And I just noticed a different atmosphere in the city when I arrived in July, and the smell of pot was heavy in the air. Police weren't cracking down on those small crimes, I guess, those broken windows style lifestyle crimes. And so I guess that set the scene for what's happening now.
Yeah, it's a very interesting analysis that this wasn't a sudden eruption. This was a gradual growing of hostility towards police and pushing the envelope. The envelope, and when the envelope wasn't pushed back, then it just leads to more and more lawlessness.
But before we get to the, I mean, there's so much to talk about, because since the last time we saw you, but before we
should say how we met Miranda.
When we first met Miranda, actually, because we read Miranda, then we actually met Miranda.
Whilst we were in New York doing covering the Harvey Weinstein trial, which you can learn a lot more about at the Harvey Weinstein Trial Unfiltered, our podcast, available wherever you get your. Sorry.
Brilliant podcast.
Oh,
thank you very much.
Thank you. So we met Miranda hanging around the Fox News studios.
Oh, that's right.
Looking for an interview.
Mark Stein.
Yes, Mark Stein introduced us, actually. That's right. That's correct. Yes.
And it was love at first sight.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right, because we were there for the Weinstein trial, and you were also covering the Weinstein trial. And then we actually then met you like a couple of weeks later.
Where you were debuting FBI Lovebirds at CPAC, which was so good, so funny, and got a standing ovation. And then, of course, it was a little bit late because, unbeknownst to all of us, you'd been somewhere special.
That's right. Yes, we'd gone and met the president, who
literally just before everything got locked down. I mean, when I look back at that, Miranda, when you think of us meeting there, that was in February.
February 29th.
February 29th. We came back here. I mean, how I can time all this stuff is that we were meant to have a party for St. Patrick's Day, and so that's the 17th of March, and then we were like. I remember saying to Phelim, I don't feel right about asking anyone to come to our house because of the virus and all that. But nothing had locked down, and it was very voluntary. And we sort of said to people, you probably don't want to come. And people were like, well,
we voluntarily cancelled the party.
But then 2 days later, the whole thing stopped. I mean, before we get on to the riots, I mean, how have you experienced, how was it? How was the whole what do you feel about how Americans reacted to the pandemic?
I mean, the last party that we went to in New York was on about March 7th, March 8th. And even then, it was a 30th birthday party for Johnny Oleszewski, who's the entertainment writer for The Post. And it was at a Midtown hotel. And I think he had about half the number that were supposed to come. People just were nervous about coming. People weren't shaking hands, but they were still in that awkward stage where they almost shook hands. I didn't get the subway from early January. So, trying to remember back and piece it together. And even when in February we were at CPAC, late February, remember there was... in Washington, there was all the hand sanitizer everywhere, which was a new thing. I mean, someone did have COVID at CPAC, but it didn't spread. And I wonder if that was because of the hand sanitizer. Everyone was being really meticulous. And although we were quite relaxed and we went to bars with, we were with big groups of people, I think that even at that stage, COVID was spreading through America at that stage. It was a pretty good chance we thought that it would be there. And so we were being fairly cautious.
I was wondering, would CPAC be cancelled? I remember thinking
That's
that. I remember thinking, this, especially when CPAC now, it's not like the old days of CPAC where it was stuck in this small hotel in DC and literally you were like this, but it's still a very, very crowded environment. The hallways do get crowded. And I was just thinking, I wonder, will it be able to go ahead? And I think if it had been the next weekend, it may not have gone ahead. It was literally, the thing was starting to close down then. But so, you've been following, obviously you probably follow the Australian media. How have they been reporting the American experience of the pandemic? If it's anything like the Irish experience, like we're getting letters of sympathy from Irish people about how terrible the pandemic is in America.
And the truth is, for example, Ireland, and I don't know where the Australian number is, but Ireland is worse. The numbers are worse
per capita
in Ireland than they are in America.
Yes, yeah. So there's more people. Yeah, yes, it is. People don't know this.
Europe is, it's so hypocritical and dishonest, the reporting in Europe, because per capita, America's not as bad as most European countries. Australia's done very well because, it's small, island, and they followed President Trump's ban on Chinese flights from China the next day, so that helped a lot. And there are like 102, I think, people died, not many more than that. So Australia and New Zealand have got off pretty much scot-free and are starting to open up. But, in America, this is another ploy to attack Donald Trump. But half of the COVID deaths have been in New York and New Jersey. And, only 10 states, I think, have got about 80% of the deaths. So most of America has escaped. And it's really the Democrat cities, those high-density cities that have been hit the hardest. And you can sheet some of that blame back to, in New York anyway, to Governor Cuomo and to Mayor de Blasio, because they were very slow in closing things down. And also the worst thing they did was half the deaths in America have been nursing home residents, elderly people in nursing homes. And Governor Cuomo issued an order in late March, I think the 23rd or 24th, forcing nursing homes to accept COVID positive patients. And that was a death sentence for most of the people in those nursing homes. The disease just spread like wildfire. Those nursing homes are short-staffed at the best of times, and they didn't have enough PPE, the masks and the gloves and the gowns. And so there was no way they were going to be able to isolate those patients. It was really criminal what happened. And yet these Democrat governors and mayors have the hide to try and blame the president for something that was entirely in their own control.
But do you think that do you think Cuomo is going to survive this? I've been surprised by liberal-leaning friends who gush, particularly ladies, by the way, who are sort of in love with Cuomo and remain so. And I don't want to fall out with, I don't want to fight with everyone I know, but I have to say I'm really surprised at women being like really, and women of a certain age, being like, are in love with him. And I just think his track record is so extraordinary. Is he riding this unscathed? Is he going to get out of this alive, basically? Or is he going to get put into a nursing home himself? What do you think his chances are?
Well, it's really only the New York Post and a couple of other outlets that are holding him accountable for this. He's had some pretty hairy questions at press conferences only because the Post has been prosecuting this. But, you're right. He's called the love gov. Women just throw themselves at him. They're in love with him. And it's because they're sort of locked down single women in New York watching the television. He's having these daily briefings. He's sort of got that macho Italian thing going. And at the beginning, I even thought it was refreshing, and he was a bit like a Robert De Niro character and, talking tough and being a bit compassionate and talking about his daughters, and you knew he was single, and I don't know, there was something intoxicating about it at the time when you felt that you were kind of all alone and there was no one really reassuring you. And then you find out what a lowlife he is and how dishonest he's been. And when he finally gets questions asked of him, he blames everybody but himself. And continued, even when it was brought to his attention that these poor people in the nursing homes were dying, he was so stubborn. He didn't rescind the order until Mother's Day. So his insincerity I think it's been fatally damaging for him, because before this, people were talking about him as the stand-in for Joe Biden, who's hopeless and, as we all know, cognitively impaired and stuck in a basement. And so there was some talk that he might replace him at the last minute, or maybe be a vice presidential pick, although I think he's too arrogant for that. But I just think that his presidential hopes have been badly dented.
He's overshadowed Bill de Blasio in a great sense through this, right? You really aren't getting any. I mean, the only thing I've recently seen about Bill de Blasio is that his daughter, obviously famously, got arrested, and her mugshot was like, it's priceless. I don't know if you've seen her mugshot; it's just incredible. But where is he? Like, he's missing in action. Is he missing in action, Bill de Blasio, for the last few months?
Well, he's just so incompetent. He's so awful, it's hard to even explain to anyone who doesn't live in New York. He's loathed by everybody, left and right. It's the one thing that everyone in New York is united about, that Bill de Blasio is just Mayor Putz, they call him. And I guess it's played well for Cuomo, because by comparison to de Blasio, he looks like a genius.
Yeah. Yes.
But, de Blasio is so woke. He's so progressive. He's so pathetic. He held the police back. The NYPD is the finest police force in the world, and has, put down riots. And they haven't had a riot for 27 years, but, has done a magnificent job in very difficult circumstances with this terrible mayor who hobbles them. And he hobbled them at the beginning of the riots. They could have nipped it in the bud straight away, as Rudy Giuliani keeps saying he did and would have done. But they had one hand tied behind their back, were not allowed to use their mounted horses or their, pepper gas or any of the riot stuff that they have that quickly quells riots and looting. But he allowed the looting to go ahead. He's stopped, everyone's locked down. They're not allowed to go shopping. They're not allowed to get their hair done. But the looters can go and loot with impunity. It's just so enraging. And I think part of the reason for the riots is these cities have been locked down so unreasonably for so long. I think Americans were incredible, especially young people, were very compliant for a long time, but it went on too long. And so there's sort of this catharsis now, this explosion. And a lot of it is just people wanting to get out and about and around other young people.
Yeah. I mean, talking about impunity, now we have these marches. So, you weren't allowed to go to your granny's funeral. Yeah. But 5,000, 50,000 people can march. Millions can march on the streets.
I mean, I actually told the story on a recent podcast of ours. So my auntie died in England, in Folkestone, and they had a funeral, and you could only have 10 people. And, the way it turned out, because of Folkestone and whatever in the distance, 4 people attended. So 4 people attended the woman's funeral, and none of them were allowed to speak because of hygiene and the virus and all of this, because of the protocols. And literally days later, you have these thousands of people on the streets of London, and no one is condemning it. No one is condemning it. None of these leaders are condemning it. And the same here. And in fact, it's even worse as you know, I mean, it's worse here in the United States, where you have epidemiologists saying that racism is a virus. And it's a more serious virus. Can you talk to that?
Well, I mean, these same people who have been telling us that we can't move, we can't shake hands ever again, we have to wear masks, we're going to only open up very, very slowly. You've had hairdressers go to jail. You've had gym owners slapped with thousands of dollars of fines. And suddenly these same health people are signing open letters saying, well, for protests, everything, all those rules are out the window because racism is as bad or worse a contagion than the virus.
Yeah.
It's sick. And the other thing is that the political people, the Democrats, particularly the Democrat governors, people like Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan, who Donald Trump calls half Whitmer. She is probably the worst, the most scolding, bossy governor of all. People can't, people were allowed to smoke weed, but they weren't allowed to mow their grass. People weren't allowed to go out on their boats, completely nonsensical rules just because she's someone who loves to tell people what to do and control them. And also because, I think that these Democrat governors are trying to keep the economy suppressed until election day. And there's a photo of her on the weekend, cheek by jowl with a bunch of other protesters at some Black Lives Matters thing. So it's, okay for me, but not for thee, or it's not okay for, Republicans who own small businesses. I suppose they think that people, old people and small business owners are going to be Trump voters, whereas protesters are going to be Democrats. I don't know, but it's so hypocritical, and it just erodes the faith of Americans, remaining faith they have in the health authorities, who now are just seen as being as biased and hypocritical as everyone else.
Yeah, I'm sure you saw that the story about in the Lancet, or the story about the Lancet. It's very depressing, that the Lancet, and just obviously to remind everyone, where the Lancet had published this piece of research that hydroxychloroquine, blew it out of the water. It's no good.
It was actually dangerous.
It's actually dangerous, and that's the Lancet. And the more, and people would say, oh, that's the Lancet. And I know even our colleague was sending it to her friends and saying, oh God, well, the Lancet now have actually said this because it's the Lancet. And obviously it's been,
vetted.
It's been vetted, it's been
peer reviewed.
And then to discover, you couldn't make it up. You couldn't really make it up how bad the research was. I mean, somebody, an adult porn star connected with it somehow. You couldn't make that up. That they had done it just because they hate Trump so much.
Yeah.
And that kind of brings me to my next question, which is, you have been an observer of the world of politics. You've watched things going on in Australia for many, many years. You've watched things going on now in the United States for a long time. Are you optimistic or pessimistic about the future, given what's happened? Because a lot has happened.
Look, I think that, a lot depends on the election in November. And I think not just for America, for Australia, particularly because we're so vulnerable to China. And so you need a strong America who's going to muscle up to China. And I think, though, the positive part is I think it's more likely that Donald Trump will win in November, as long as he doesn't stuff it up, because he has a tendency to shoot himself in the foot. But he also is a Houdini, and he was cruising to a landslide, I think, last year because the economy is just doing so well, or had been doing so well, and black unemployment was down at record levels. And so the Democrats had tried everything. They'd thrown at him, they'd spied on his campaign, they made up the Russia collusion conspiracy theory, they had the FBI Mueller inquiry, they had the impeachment. None of it worked, and he finished the year on a high. And then, of course, the pandemic comes along, and then they try and hang every death around his neck. Then, of course, the economy has been crashed, and so that was Trump's trump card for the election. So, and then we saw on Monday, just as Donald Trump said, he said the economy is going to, we've done it before, we'll do it again, it'll come back bigger and better than ever. And sure enough, the jobs figures came out, 2.5 million jobs added in May. Everyone had been expecting that the unemployment rate would be 20%. Remember, it was 4.5% late last year. and the unemployment rate was not 20%, it was 13%. And, you should have seen MSNBC, CNN, they were so upset. This is just a disaster from their point of view. Fabulous for America, fabulous for the world, and shows the stock market had been, arcing up, and they anticipated this. So it's all good news, but not for the Democrats. Everything somehow Donald Trump seems to get away with, has many lives. So I think that I think a lot of people are being red-pilled about the looting and the fact that all those strictures on us to be locked down and be good people and social distance just got thrown out the window when it came to protesters and looters. So everyone's seen through that. And I think that they've also seen the viciousness, the sort of struggle sessions that people are being forced to undergo now, the real militant Antifa violence and hatred. It's Trump derangement syndrome that has turned really poisonous and dangerous. And I think there'll be a lot of people who won't say that they're going to vote for Donald Trump, which is why the polls are as they were when Hillary Clinton was supposed to win. And I think what will be good news would be if Trump managed to get quite a comprehensive win, at least win the popular vote as well as the Electoral College in November. It's not going to stop the Democrats from being evil, but it actually shows that it'll give Trump a bit more time to fine-tune things, and not that he will ever get any thanks for it. And it'll allow the Republicans to kind of retool for a post-Trump world. And with any luck, it will give the Democrats such a shock that they will have to reform themselves, because they are in a very bad place at the moment. They have gone so far left. They're completely captive to the woke, progressive, aggressive wing of their party. And that makes them effectively unelectable without dirty tricks.
Yeah. Well, let's see. I mean, the big problem the Democrats also have is Joe Biden. I mean, in many ways, the basement helps him. The pandemic has helped him because it's kept him out of the public. A camera has not been in front of him without a script also being in front of him, and he can't even read the script. He tried doing a podcast, and I call him the podcaster in chief. It was just embarrassing. You could actually hear him read the script. He flicked the pages because he was unable to sustain a conversation. I mean. And I find myself almost unable to watch him because I don't like watching old people struggle. It's
called elder. It's like some form of
a
form of elder abuse.
It's not good. I feel sorry for him. Yeah. What a kind of weird psychology.
Well, I think the Democrats are smarter than that. I mean, Victor Davis Hanson made a very good point that they'll get if they were successful, that they would try to get Biden elected. But have a very woke, very progressive VP who would actually be the person that you really are end up in the end and become the president, and bring in all these very leftist things.
But my point is, I don't see the American people
voting for him,
electing someone who, I mean, whatever the word is, I think is cognitively impaired. I mean, he's not senile, right? He's not speaking to the trees or whatever, but he can't remember names. He's struggling for words. He's just got to that age where. And there's plenty of people older than him who can grasp words. He's just cognitively impaired, and that you don't want that as a president. And how's he going to manage in a 3-hour debate? If Donald Trump can stop being Donald Trump for 3 hours and say nothing, and if someone asks him a question, one of those big long-winded gotcha questions, no, my answer is no. I yield my time to Senator Biden, Vice President Biden.
Yes. Yeah, actually,
talk away there, Joe.
Yeah, talk away, Joe. Yeah, that'd be good.
Yeah. So, you talked there about MSNBC. I don't know if the MSNBC sneaked out the news late last week on Friday. It hasn't really got into the media yet, but did you see their new employee?
Yes, Lisa Page.
Yes.
The FBI love her. And just about to, the Barr Department of Justice investigation is pretty far along, and there's a few people that are going to find themselves in deep trouble, and she's one of them. It's incredible that MSNBC is deciding to get involved in this. I mean, you know, and all the other bad guys, Brennan and
and Clapper,
McCabe, they all get these cushy media gigs. It's the media in America, much of it has just become so not even pretending to be impartial or fair or honest.
Yeah. I mean, it's great news for us, I think, in terms of the play, because, you know, I mean, people knew about the FBI lovebirds, but now she's on TV, you know, it's like it even adds, you know, oh, that girl, yeah, that one, oh yeah, so like, you know, so it's great for us, and we're hoping to, you know, have a little announcement, a minor announcement about FBI lovebirds.
We'll keep you posted on that one
in the near future, and we'll keep all our people posted. Watch carefully. We're hoping to have a small announcement, nothing big, you know. We wouldn't, you know us, we wouldn't do anything controversial or provocative at all. So just one last thing, but before we go on to, we want to talk about the recipe. Your recipe.
We're going to ask you about your recipe and your piece of art, but before that,
tell us about Cardinal Pell. You covered the Cardinal Pell case. Just give people a quick summary of what it was and where it is at now, and what's your latest thinking on it.
Well, Cardinal Pell was, you know, wrongly railroaded by.
He's Australia he's an Australian cardinal.
Yes. He was number 3 in the Vatican. He was the guy who was uncovering all the corruption in the Vatican. There is a conspiracy theory which has some quite good theories in it, that he was nobbled because he was getting too close to the dirty money in the Vatican. Anyway, one way or the other, the police in Victoria, the commissioner there has had a vendetta against him for 15 years. The police have been leaking dirty information to the media down in Victoria for all of that time. His reputation in Victoria was trash. And so then they found trawling. The police did a very unusual thing. They trawled for victims. They found an alleged victim, one man's word against Cardinal Pell's. There was a hung jury. Then there was another trial. He was found guilty of pedophilia, of raping a choir boy or 2 choir boys in the middle of St. Patrick's Cathedral after a busy Sunday Mass. It was extremely implausible scenario, and the other choir boy had died, and he had told his mother when she asked, have you ever been interfered with by a priest? I don't know why she asked that. He said, no, I never have been. Anyway, so the single accuser won the day, and Cardinal Pell spent 2 years in jail. Then his appeal went to the very highest court in the land, and he was acquitted. The judges unanimously found that it was an unsafe verdict. But, you know, he was then hounded. I mean, there's no rest for him. He's seen by a lot of anti-Catholics in Australia, there's a lot of them, as the sort of representative of the Vatican. And it doesn't matter whether he is guilty or not. He has to pay for the sins of the church, the terrible sins of the church in the child abuse scandals of the past. So that's where it is. And, you know, there are, I think, now civil suits as well.
He's an outspoken conservative as well, so the media have always had a target on his back. Is that correct?
Well, that's the main thing I should have said, is that he's a social conservative and very strong. He revamped all the sort of priest training, the seminaries here, and made them, you know, it managed to make them actually sound, so that there are many more young trainee priests in his mould. And he was against same-sex marriage and euthanasia and cloning and so on. And the same-sex marriage thing became a really big issue for him in Melbourne. And there were a lot of, gay people wearing rainbow sashes who would come up to communion. And he would say, look, you know, if you're not wearing the rainbow sash, I don't know, and I'll give you communion, but I can't give you communion when you're openly saying that you're coming up here with the rainbow sash. So he's absolutely strict by the book Catholic, and they crucified him for that, and I think they would never forgive him.
Yeah.
Well, we're coming to the end of our time with you, but Miranda, this has been so gorgeous and just great to see you as well. We're all stuck in our homes. 2 things, and actually, I suppose particularly given the fact that we're stuck in our homes, do you have a go-to recipe then in your home that that you're famous for?
Well, I have one now, and it's pizza. And it's not very exciting, but I've always loved pizza because when I was a child, I grew up in Tokyo and we ate nothing but Japanese food. And then my best friend, who was American, Laurie Halloran, said she was having her birthday party, like her 9th or 10th birthday party. And she said, "We're having pizza." And I said, "What's that?" From then on, I have had a love affair with pizza. So, and because we weren't able to order in pizza or go out to restaurant pizza, I have learnt to make my own. And I started off doing it the hard way with, the yeast and the blah, blah, blah. And then I got lazy and I finally now got just pita breads that you just put the stuff on top, and they are absolutely delicious and probably healthier.
And you put them into the oven, or you put them on the stove top?
No, put them in the oven. Yeah, cook them like real pizzas. I think they're more delicious than a pizza that you get from, that's the revelation that we've had, is that you can put anything on top of them and keep a bunch of pita breads in the freezer and you can have pizza morning, noon and night.
And are you making your own tomato sauce then? You're making a tomato sauce? No, you're getting that out of a jar. Go girl, go girlfriend.
And I'm doing a whole lot of other stuff. So I'm just, when we got to New York, because our kids are now out of our hands, I was cooking maybe once a week if I was lucky. We'd go out for dinner all the time, which is, it's sad that all those restaurants are now shut.
Yeah, terrible. And then your piece of art. What piece of art would you like to share with us?
That's a hard decision, but I decided on the St. Crispin's Day speech from Shakespeare's Henry V. And the reason for that is because my name's Miranda, so from The Tempest, and my sister is Rosalind from As You Like It. And our parents were, obviously Shakespeare fans. And so we grew up with that as a sort of wallpaper. And then fast forward, I have my own children. And my oldest son was a really precocious reader. And he got to school and he used to have this beautiful writing style, which was just instinctively sort of sparse and, evocative and no adjectives. And he had these terrible teachers who would tell him, edit his work and say, no, you have to stud it with all these flowery adjectives. And he hated it, got dispirited, decided he didn't like English. So I complained to my father about this, and my father was also a journalist. And so his solution was to send my son some Shakespeare quotations. And one of them was the St. Crispin's Day speech and Henry V. And I think it's kind of, it kind of works for now because it's, it's about, like, it only has, the reason he sent it, my father sent it to my son, was because it's incredibly stirring words, and it's to get these soldiers to go to battle, and a battle where they were outnumbered and were probably going to be thrashed, and they win. And it's really because they were so inspired by Henry's words, and he did it all with, I think, 2 adjectives. So this was to explain to my son that you can write well, and the best writer in English didn't use adjectives.
Oh my God, I love that.
Yeah, I think over too many adjectives is a sign of a poor writer. Actually, it's lack of confidence in your own writing, actually, and your own ability to communicate.
And imagine doing that to a young boy who loves reading and writing, and just, he knew it didn't sound right. He didn't like it, and he was forced to do it, and he lost any pride in what he was writing.
Oh my God. Anyway, we have come to the end of our time with you, Miranda. This has been so great. We are really looking forward to seeing you soon in New York or in DC, by the way, perhaps in DC.
Maybe we might be announcing something about the FBI lovebirds in the near future.
Yes, and we might be meeting, and we
might be of an interest to a journalist.
That's right, exactly.
I wouldn't know.
Yeah, we'll keep in touch about that.
Okay.
Play it on Broadway when Broadway reopens.
That could happen too.
That could happen too. Yeah, we definitely want to.
Thank you very much, Miranda.
Thank you very much, Miranda.
Pleasure.
So that was great. And she has, you can read her columns every week in the New York Post, and you can also read her columns in the Daily Telegraph, in that's the Australian Daily Telegraph. What a place New York is.
Unbelievable. And by the way, that piece that she talked about from YouTube, the speech, St. Crispin's Day, we'll put up links to that on our Facebook page, and we'll also put up some links, I think, if we can, on our website, the Unreported Story Society. But also just go on YouTube and look. There's loads of variations. We'd have added a piece, but copyright, YouTube might have taken it down, so we decided not to do that. But there's a really great version of it with Kenneth Branagh, so I would highly recommend that you watch that and get any young ones that are around to watch it with you, because it really is really powerful. So we're kind of coming to the end. We're kind of coming to the end of the show, but people have complained that we haven't had enough menus, and we haven't had any recipes, I should say. And so I baked, and actually it's getting easier to bake now because you can actually get flour in the shops. But I was very lucky, but at the time when I made these, there still wasn't flour, so very luckily that the neighbour, David, across the road, shared some flour with me, so I was very happy with that. So I made crazy good banana yogurt walnut muffins, and it's kind of a recipe I made up myself, but it's really easy and really yummy. So it's banana yogurt walnut muffins. Yum, 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 yum. I've got the recipe up there. You're looking at the photographs, and they were just great. And I just made a whole batch of them and went around the neighborhood here and handed them out, because actually they're so good that you'd eat too many of them. But did you like them, Phelim? Did you think they were fabulous?
They were fantastic. Do you want to give the... Are you going to do a little summary, or
no? People can. No, it's a very simple. It's actually a really simple recipe. You know, it's very simple recipe. The one thing I would say is be very careful when you're using. Not very careful. If I ever have a recipe, I think it's an easy rule of thumb. If I have any recipe that involves any dairy, always understand that the only dairy is full fat dairy. So when you have the Greek style natural yogurt, for example, in this recipe, it's the whole fat. And by the way, I really spit in the face of low fat yogurt. I just hate that stuff. It's really awful. And then when I mention milk in any recipes, I'm also talking about whole fat milk. But this is a super, super simple recipe. It didn't take long. Just great. The one thing I would say to you is when you're doing the muffin tray, butter the muffin tray really well. Use the butter paper that you already have to butter all the muffin, and then the muffins they'll all pop out real easy.
I can vouch for that.
Oh, they were just yummy. I might make more today. But anyway, we have come to the end. It's been a longer show than we expected, and we're reading all your messages, by the way. Thank you so much, everyone. The cats did not appear. There's high winds today, so they're a bit excited, and the back door is open, so they're more excited about being outside than joining you. But we will definitely get them back soon. Next time.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.